So the supplies to make your own hoodie. So you're gonna need the pattern, you're gonna need fabric, and you're gonna need the thread. For the pattern, there's 3 ways you can get it. You could download the free sewing pattern PDF on my website in the link below. That has it in the large format or the home printer version. So if you get the large format, send it out to a print shop, they'll print it on the large format printer, or you can print it at home and just tape all the pieces together. The second way is if you want to avoid printing anything, just get the paper pattern. And the third way is if you get the DIY kit, it comes with the paper pattern. So the second thing is the fabric. We're gonna use poly cotton brush fleece for this one, and it's gonna be 2 1/4 yards. And you're also gonna need rib knit, and the rib knit's gonna be 1/4 yard. On top of that, you're gonna want thread. I'm gonna be using white thread. The DIY kits come with matching colored thread, but for me, I'm gonna use white thread so it's easier to see on camera. And if you want to hit up all the fabric shops, get all the fabric, get the thread, totally do that. But if you want some convenience, if you want everything just neatly packaged into one package sent to your home, then you can get the DIY kits, which comes with the pattern, the fabric, the thread, everything you need to sew this hoodie so you can press play, sew the same hoodie as me, and we could be hoodie twins. And the hoodie is just one DIY kit of a collection that I have, all made for beginners. If you get a kit, it comes with everything you need to sew, and each kit is paired with a beginner-friendly tutorial so that if you're first time sewing and you want to learn how to sew at home, it makes it that much easier. So once you have all the supplies, let's talk about the tools you're going to need. And first things first, you're going to need a sewing machine. Sewing machines come with a straight stitch, and then you're going to need a stretch stitch for sewing a hoodie because the fabric stretches. So you're either going to want to use a zigzag stitch, or some sewing machines will come with a stretch stitch setting. Also, because you're working with knit, you're going to want a ballpoint needle, and a ballpoint needle is just a little bit less sharp of a needle, so it doesn't cut through the knit fabric. With woven fabrics, you can use your typical universal needle, but with stretch fabric, you usually want to use a ballpoint needle. You'll also want fabric shears for cutting your fabric. You're going to want craft scissors for cutting your paper pattern. You're going to want tailor's chalk and a ruler for markings. Then you're going to want sewing pins and sewing clips. Lastly, you're going to need an iron and an ironing board. And those are all the tools you're going to need. So let's start sewing a hoodie. Okay, so the first step, you're going to pull out your pattern and you're going to find the right size and cut out your size. This is what the pattern looks like. This is why sometimes printing it at home is not as fun, because you have to tape like 20, 30 pages together, and it just becomes a lot more work than you might want. Delicate paper. Nice. Okay, ideally you have a bigger desk or you do this on the floor, but essentially there's a chart at the top. That'll show you the different sizes, and each size has a certain line style to it. So once you decide your size, you know what line you are. You find that on the pattern. Should I do a size medium or small? What size do you think I should do?
Medium. Right in the middle.
Medium it is. Okay. So if I'm going to do a medium, I help stick highlighter. Highlight your line. You know you're going to be the solid line, which is the easiest line. And then when you're on the pattern, you just follow that line so you know where to cut. The only reason I do this is because there's like 7 or 8 lines all beside each other, and you're cutting so much you might lose track. But if you don't need it, then you just start cutting. If you're cutting, make sure to use your craft scissors, not your fabric shears. Fabric shears, they say don't cut anything but fabric with because you'll dull the blades. I've never done it. I don't know if it's that big of a deal, but these are like $2. So just spend the $2, buy craft scissors. So now we're gonna cut the pattern. Now, if you want to preserve your original pattern, maybe you want to make more than one size, maybe you just don't want to cut the actual original, then what you would do is you'd find your size, you would get tracing paper, put it on top, get a marker, mark the outline on the tracing paper. Now you have your tracing paper, put that over oak paper, which is separate from all this. Use a tracing tool, carve it out, and then from that, remove the tracing paper. Now you have the oak paper with the copy of the pattern. Use a marker, draw that, cut that out, and then now you've transferred this pattern from tracing paper onto oak paper. That is the right way to do it. That's a lot of steps though. So I have a video if you want to see how that's done, but I'm just gonna cut this out. It's how I do it on my tutorials because I know my size, and I don't know. I feel like a lot of people just cut the pattern, but maybe I don't know that many people. So my sample size is pretty small, not reliable. And we're just gonna cut out all our pattern panels. As you're cutting your pattern, you're gonna see the front panel has some extra lines here. This is the pocket placement, so you know where to put the pocket. So just make sure to cut around these lines, don't cut into them. So once you're done cutting the pattern, you'll notice every panel is marked. It goes from 1 out of 8, 2 out of 8, 3 out of 8 to 8 out of 8. That just means there's 8 panels, and they're all numbered in the order we're gonna work on them. So we'll work on number 1 first, and number 8 last. Another thing you might notice is it says notch here twice and then notch here once. Usually on patterns, you'll have 2 notches, which shows that this is the back side, and then 1 notch to show the front. So on the front panel, it'll have 1 notch, on the back it'll have 2. But I went the extra step, and on my patterns, I added sew to back panel 3 out of 9, and then sew to front panel 2 out of 9. So if you miss the notches, if you're not used to them, I just label it so that you know. Instead of having symbols, just make it clear and write it so that beginners who are starting, they know what the deal is, you know? So let's start cutting the fabric. So some fabric comes tubular and some doesn't. So most fabric will come at around like 60 inches by the bolt, but if it's tubular, it'll basically come in half, so 30 inches. The best thing to do before you cut any fabric is to pre-wash it so that it's pre-shrunk, it's ready to go. And essentially, like, you want to use the same washer settings that you would wash your final garment when it's made for the fabric. And before you cut, you want to put the panels on top and cut. Now, some will have instructions which tells you to cut 1 piece. Some will have instructions which tell you to cut 2 pieces. If you cut 2 pieces, it usually means you have to have it reflective. If I cut 2 pieces like this without flipping it, I'm gonna have 2 right arms or 2 left arms. If I have 1 piece like this, and then after I cut that one, I flip it, that makes it reflective, so I now have a left and right arm. Alternatively, if you're using tubular fabric, the fabric's already sandwiched together, so if you put it down once and cut, you'll have 2 layers of fabric cut at the same time, and you'll have a right and left arm. So you won't have to worry about that. So as we're going through this, you want to look at the instructions here. It shows you the panel number, it shows you what the panel is, sleeve, arm, body, and it'll show you how many to cut. It'll also show you the direction of greatest stretch. So when you're cutting the pattern, you want to reference the cutting guide, which will show you the orientation for the pattern as you're cutting it on the fabric. This is important because each of the fabrics have a line for you to follow so that when you construct your final hoodie, the direction of greatest stretch is horizontally around your body, not vertically. And you'll notice like the weaves in the knit here go vertically. If you check your sweater at home or your t-shirts, the lines usually run vertically up and down your body, and that is to give you the greatest stretch going horizontally. It's a little bit easier to see on rib knit material because it has that much more stretch, but basically the fabric only has 2-way stretch. So it stretches a lot this way, 2 ways, but not 4-way. 4-way would be up and down and horizontally. And so what you want is to have the fabric on you this way so that it stretches horizontally. Thus, you want to line up the pattern so that the grain line, this line with the arrows on the edges, runs parallel with the fabric, and you could see these little ribs kind of create these lines that go across. Make sure that's parallel with the grain line. You're going to grab your pattern, put it on top. Now some of them will be a place on fold, meaning this represents half the pattern, and when you place it on the fold and cut, you'll then open it up and get a symmetrical cut. So if you have tubular fabric, that means there's already a crease here, so you would place it on the fold. And if you don't have tubular fabric, you have 60-inch, you would just fold the fabric yourself and create that fold. And you want to pin it to the fabric. Okay, so now you have the pattern clipped to the fabric. We'll just cut around, and that's our first piece. So grab your fabric shears and start cutting. And you have your first piece cut. When you're cutting the fabric, like ideally, you don't want to pull your scissors up too high and stretch the fabric. You want to keep the scissors nice and low so that the fabric can lay as flat as possible. This ensures you just get a nice clean cut that matches the pattern. Ideally, long cuts like this. If you cut like this, you get a lot of edges, a lot of corners, versus something more smooth like this. And there's no rush. Measure twice, cut once, take your time. It's not a race. And once you cut all your fleece pieces out, don't forget number 6 and 7 are cut on the secondary fabric, the rib knit. And then you've cut all your pieces. At this point, we got all 8 panels cut out. 6 of them are on the primary fabric, the polycotton fleece, and 2 of them are on the rib knit material, the secondary fabric. So before we put these pieces aside and start sewing, let's notch our panels. Notching is where you take scissors and you do a tiny 1/4 inch snip. And the reason for it is usually it helps align certain pieces together or folds, or it could show you where the front and the back are. So for example, on the sleeve, we have 1 notch here, which signifies that this is the front side, and then 2 notches here, 2, which means the back side or the rear side. So those are some small tips, but let's just start notching. 1/4 inches, it has to be tiny. Fabric scissors, see a notch here. Just gonna do a little snip, tiny, tiny snip. Line this up, the fabric, tiny snip. So the pattern's already lined up with the fabric, so I'll just do a little bit of readjusting here to make sure it's properly lined up, and then a little snip. This is the back side of the hoodie, so you'll see 2 notches wherever it says notch here, because it's the back, and I said the back has 2 notches versus the front having 1. 1, 2, 1, 2. Ooh. There we go. All right. Now all these panels are numbered up to 8. And they are in order of what we're going to deal with. So panel number 1, we're going to work with first. So we're going to push all these to the side and start with panel number 1. For your sewing machine, I have a standard presser foot that I'm going to use. You can use a walking foot, it'll help, but you don't need to have it. But you will want to have ballpoint needles. You want to replace those with your sharp needles because these are designed to push the individual strands of the knit aside to make the stitches, versus a sharp needle might cut some of the weaves, the thread, and that'll leave holes which are really visible in material like fleece. Secondly, if you're able to, you'll want to adjust the presser foot. So the presser foot pressure can increase or decrease. And for soft, fluffy material like fleece, you're going to want light pressure. If it's too hard, it'll squeeze down on the fabric and you'll get distorted stitching because it's also a stretch fabric. So it won't feed through as smoothly as you want. My favorite part, so chill, so mesmerizing. In my other tutorial video, how to sew a boxy hoodie, I had it at a straight stitch with a length of 3, a tension of 3, and a width of 0 for all my stitches. But if your sewing machine has the option, you can go to a straight stretch stitch. So you keep it at the stretch. So you keep it at the straight stitch, you go to the stretch stitch setting, and then you should be able to sew without any worry. The first step is going to be serging an edge, and if you have a serger and an overlocker, that's going to work perfectly. If you don't, you can do a zigzag stitch in replace of that. So at that point, we would go to our zigzag settings. I would go back to a level 3 here, width of 3 and a tension of 3. Let's start sewing. Oh. We're going to take panel number 1 and we're going to take the pattern off. And what we're going to do is zigzag stitch or serge these 2 diagonal edges. Now if you're using the zigzag stitch instead of a serger, you're going to want the needle to fall on the edge of the fabric or just before it. And so now we have a serged edge on both sides. We're going to flip it over to the wrong side, the fluffy side, and we're going to fold these edges in 1 inch and press it with an iron. So for our iron, when we're ironing, we want it on a low to medium heat setting because this fabric has polyester in it, and any kind of polyester has a risk of melting if you have it too hot. So we're going to have a low to medium setting, and we're going to fold this 1 inch and press it down. Okay, press, and then press. And so we're going to bring this fabric under our sewing machine. We're going to sew it at 3/4 of an inch seam allowance. And before you start sewing, make sure you switch it back to your stretch stitch settings. So length of 3 if you're doing a straight stitch, width of 0, tension of 3. Whew. When you're sewing something like fleece, it has some stretch to it, so you want to be careful and not pull the fabric too hard. What I'd suggest is use your hands. Just keep the fabric taut so that it's smooth, but let the feed dogs of this sewing machine pull the fabric through. And once we've done one side, let's do the other side. So this is what it'll look like when you're done. We have our serged edge on the inside, and then we did our straight stitch on the outside. So now with the remaining 3 edges, not including the bottom edge, we're going to do a serge or a zigzag stitch to finish off the raw edges, and then we're going to fold them 3/8 of an inch and press it. So switch back to your zigzag settings and let it rip. So with the Kangaroo Pocket all set, we want to grab panel number 2 now, and we want this Kangaroo Pocket to go on top. So let's take the pattern off, and let's unfold panel number 2. And what's going to happen is we want to find the right placement for the Kangaroo Pocket. So I'm actually going to grab my pattern panel back, and I'm going to place it on the left side. I'm going to line it up exactly to how I had it before, and I'm actually going to grab some clips and clip it in place so that it holds. So I'm going to grab some clips here, clip it there, clip it here, one at the bottom, and one at the side. And what this is going to show me is where I need to place the Kangaroo Pocket. So I'll line it up based on size. So this is a size medium, so it should be this one. And this has basically the lined placement for the pocket. So if we line up the left side of the hoodie, we should be able to then pin the right side in its place. So we'll grab some pins. And again, with the left side matched up to the placement of the pattern panel, we'll then pin the right side so that it holds its place. Put one at the bottom, one at the top, and one at the side. And then now we just have to unclip the pattern, slide it out of there, and now we can add pins to seal the left side in. So again, one at the top, one on the bottom, and a pin on the side. All right. So the Kangaroo Pockets, now I shouldn't have put the pin in here. It goes in there. So now the Kangaroo Pockets attached to the front panel. We're going to sew down the top edge and the side edges at 3/8 of an inch seam allowance. So we're going to do 2 top stitches to hold down this Kangaroo Pocket. We're going to do one on the edge of the fabric, and then we're going to do another one at 3/8 of an inch. So put it under your machine. Make sure you switch back to your straight stitch settings. Lower the press foot just on the edge of that fabric, and I'm going to lower the wheel by hand so I can see where the needle is going to drop, and then just before it reaches the fabric, I'm just going to adjust so that it hits on that edge. Now it's basically sewing 1/8 of an inch from the edge of that fold, so do your as best you can based on your presser foot to get that 1/8 stitch. All right, so you got the Kangaroo Pocket attached to the front panel. We're gonna do a quick 1/4 inch stitch just at the bottom to hold it together. You don't really need to do this because we're gonna do the rib knit seam allowance there eventually, but I kind of like to tie all the pieces together before we move on. So I'm gonna do a 1/4 inch stitch here, and then we'll move on to panel number 3. So you have your Kangaroo Pocket attached to panel number 2, and now we're going to attach panel number 3, which is the back side. So we're going to grab panel number 3 here. We're going to take off the paper pattern because it's done with. We've already notched it. And we're going to line it up right sides together. So the fluffy side, this is the wrong side. We're going to take this right sides together, and we're going to line up the shoulders. And when we line it up, we don't want to stretch it. We don't want to pull at it. We want it to just rest right on top and align the edges together. And then we're going to grab our clips and clip it in. The front shoulder length might be a little bit shorter, so just stretch it slightly to match the same length as the back shoulder length. And this is because of a concept called easing, which helps provide some curve and room to garment piece, usually in the shoulder sleeve, to account for the roundness. And then clip it in. 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay, perfect. And now we're going to sew 3/8 of an inch seam allowance on the shoulders. So I'm going to grab my sewing machine. Whoa. So we did a straight stitch to attach the shoulders. Now we're going to do a zigzag stitch or serge the top here, just to finish the raw edges. All right. Now we have our shoulders attached. We're going to go to the bottom, and you'll notice that they might not be perfectly aligned here. So we'll just pull the front piece down so that it matches up the bottom. And we'll try to center it as well as best we can. Like that. I'm going to throw a clip just down the middle and one on each side to hold it in place. And we're going to grab panel number 4. We're going to unclip it, take away the paper pattern. We're going to attach these to the edges. When you're attaching panel 4 to the front and the back, remember earlier we were talking about 2 notches signifying the back and 1 notch meaning the front. So make sure you look out for that on panel number 4 where it says, or when you find 2 notches, to sew it to the back panel, and then when you find a single notch, sew that to the front side of the hoodie. Grab some more clips here. And once that side's done, we're going to attach the left edge to the front panel, and we're going to match up the corners. We're going to add clips, clip it all the way up, and as we get to the top with the curve, We're just going to bring the fabric together and just pull it slightly. Don't over pull it or stretch it. Try to keep it relaxed, but bring the fabric together so that they meet and you can continue to clip it in. And you'll do that for the other side as well. And then we're going to sew at 3/8 of an inch seam allowance across the front, the back of the side. So I got it all clipped together. I'm going to bring it into the sewing machine. I'm going to make sure I'm on a straight stitch. Don't want to mess that up. Go into your stretch stitch settings, width to 0. Start sewing away. Okay, so here's what we got left. So we have the front of the hoodie. You can tell by the stitches from the Kangaroo Pocket. We can unclip these bottom pieces. And we have our side panels attached. We have a straight stitch holding it together, and then we have a zigzag stitch or a serge edged or overlocked edge to hide the raw edges. It's attached on both the left and right side. So now we're going to work on sewing it on the right side. So we'll pull it inside out or right sides out. And if you're looking at this hoodie from the front, on the sides, we want to press the seam allowance so that it is facing on the closer edge to the Kangaroo Pocket. This would be facing towards the side seam. We want to face it towards the Kangaroo Pocket so that when we press it, you'll know because the seam allowance is on this side that this side's a little bit more elevated compared to the right side. And we're going to do that throughout the whole length of this side. And we're going to bring it to our iron and we're going to press it down. Push the seam allowance underneath, tuck it towards the outside. That's how it'll look. Take your iron, just press it like that. And then for the back side, I want the seam allowance pointing to the back. So I'm just going to push it in here. Push it in from underneath, lock it in. You can tell because you'll feel it. This part's a lot lower than this. And once it's good, just take your iron and press it. With our hoodie underneath, we're going to sew at 1/4 of an inch from the seam. And we're going to lock in that seam allowance with our stitch to the body. And when you're ready, sew away. Your hoodie is looking about 70% done. We have the Kangaroo Pocket on the front. We have our side panels with the top stitching locking it in. So let's work on the sleeve next. We're going to grab panel number 5. It's going to come into play here. Don't forget we have a single notch for the front panel and 2 notches for the back. Take off that panel. And so right now you have wrong sides on top. We're just going to fold this together so that right sides are together. And we'll do the same for this side. So right sides together. We're going to clip them. And we're going to try to match up the edges here. So let's clear some space. So you have your sleeve, right sides together. We're going to line up this edge here. Try to relax it as much as you can. Massage it through so it's resting. And once the corners line up and the edges together, we're going to clip it. Boom. Bang. Bop. Badoop. Bong. Bam. And then we're going to sew this at 3/8 of an inch straight stitch, and then we're going to do a zigzag stitch or a serger. If you have a serger, you're lucky. You don't have to swap back and forth between a straight stitch and a zigzag stitch. Otherwise, let's get to work. Straight stitch, locked in. So I got 1/3 of the way through this sleeve, and then my bottom bobbin ran out of thread. So before you start the second sleeve, make sure to refill your bobbins, or just do a quick bobbin check to see if you have enough thread. Because running out of bobbin thread when you've already stitched a full sleeve is one of the worst feelings. So we got our 2 sleeves here. They have a straight stitch combining them at the long edge, and then we have our serge zigzag stitch to finish the raw edges. So now we're going to work on the cuffs, which are the ends of the sleeves. So grabbing panel number 6, we're going to take this, and what we're going to do is stitch them separately. We're going to fold it like this. Once you bring the short edge to the other short edge, you can kind of line them up based on the notch that we cut earlier. So you can see they're lined up. So you're going to grab some clips and clip it in place. Just let the machine do the work. We're just here to keep the fabric taut, and the machine is going to do the pulling. So once you have the cuffs stitched together, we're going to open it up and actually press the seam allowance open. So it's going to look like this. We're going to put the seam allowance in the middle. Use our fingers, just do a finger press, and then grab our iron and iron it open. And it's a little bit different than what we usually do. Usually we stitch pieces together and then zigzag stitch or serge them together. The reason we're doing it for this is because we actually want to flip this inside out. So what you're going to do is grab along the seam, you're going to keep it like this and do end to end. You're going to want to pinch that and then put everything inside out. So it ends up like this. So I'll do it a second time over here. You have your seam. You're going to bring one end over to the other, match it up, pinch just those two layers, and then fold one side over the other, and that's going to create our cuff. So now let's grab some clips, and we're going to try to match up the edges. So see this mismatch? I want to massage it out so that the edges are lined up together, and we're going to clip it in place. So I'm going to grab a clip right there. So we have two cuffs here, we have two sleeves. I want to put the sleeves right sides out. So grab them, flip them inside out, or right sides out. The opposite of inside out. And now we're going to attach our cuffs. So you want to match the seam of the sleeve with the seam of the cuff. And we're actually going to go this way. So the folded edge is going to eat the sleeve and be on the inside, while the open side where the clips are, that's going to meet the edge of the sleeve. So when I line up the sleeve to the cuff, I want to make sure that I match up the seams so that they're aligned, and then I'm going to clip it together. And basically you'll notice that the cuff is a lot tighter and smaller of a circumference than the sleeve, and that's because you have to stretch out the sleeve to match the cuff. That's what's going to give it that tight elastic feel once we're done stitching it. So use both hands, and basically if you use your fingers to pull out the sleeve, you'll see that it'll eventually match the cuff of the rib knit. You just go like that and pull out the cuff. So I'll do it again here. So we're going to pull with our fingers and match up the rib knit with the fleece. And when it's matched up, use your fingers and just pull the clips. And you'll notice that the fleece is kind of constricted, and it's because of the rib knit on top. Because it's smaller, it's squishing the fleece. And so we're gonna pull on the fleece just a little bit and pull on the rib knit so that they both are flat and flush with each other. And that's going to ensure that our stitches are even, and when we pull it out, we'll still get that tight cuff feeling. So as you're stitching, pull these apart. Don't over pull it and stretch it. You just want to pull it enough that it's taut, it's smooth, and then let the feed dogs pull the fabric through. So I'm just pulling the fabric apart, and I'm letting the machine do all the feeding. So I'll line up the fabric. Looks good. Give it a little tug, nothing too hard. Put the needle down. I'm going to go to the next side. Unclip. Make sure the edges are aligned. They are. And then now when you pull the cuff forward, you see that the seams are aligned and you have your cuff. So after you have the stitch, your cuff's going to look like this. We're actually just going to do a zigzag stitch or a serging stitch to clean up these raw edges. So once you're done, you have your straight stitch that connects the cuff to the sleeve, and then you have your zigzag, or if you have a serge or an overlocker, you would have done this stitch. And when you flip it over, you have your cuff, hopefully with the seams aligned, and you should have it for both. Now we're going to attach the sleeves to the body. We have our body right here. We're going to flip this inside out. That's step number 1. And when it's inside out, we now have the front panel in front of us. And we know that because we could see the stitching from the Kangaroo Pocket. And with that, leave the sleeves right side out. So it's a bit confusing because you have wrong sides out and right sides out, but leave it like this. First things first, you're going to find those notches. I see 1 notch here, which means there should be 2 notches here. 2 notches for the back, 1 notch for the front. So what I'm going to do is put this inside the arm sleeve. And I know I got my single notch here as well, so this is going to align with this single notch. And we should be able to basically feed it in like this. We're going to grab some clips and we're going to clip it. So I'll actually start at the notch here. So like this. We're just going to go all the way around. And as you get to the end, you'll see that if you haven't stretched anything out, if it all aligns well, that it'll fit perfectly. So there's no excess fabric anywhere, there's no shortage, it goes around perfectly. And so now we're going to do 3/8 of a straight stitch seam allowance all the way around. So at this point, if you want, you can open up the free arm. The reason I didn't use the free arm for the cuff is because sometimes the cuff is too small. So when you stretch it around the free arm, it stretches the cuff too much and doesn't allow the feed dogs to pull the fabric. But for this, we should have enough space. So I'm going to start at the bottom armpit area. All right, cool. So we have the sleeves attached. Let's move on to the next step. Let's add the woven tag. So I'm gonna put mine on the back if you want to follow me as well, and I'm just gonna put it on the bottom right here. So you're gonna grab your tag, place it about there, and then grab a few pins, probably just 1 or 2. And I'm just gonna find like an even spacing between here and here, knowing that the seam allowance is gonna be about 3/4 of an inch, like right there. Right at the bottom. And I'm going to pin it in place. I want to only pin it to the bottom, not to the front, just the back panel here. Then I want to pin around the design, not to mess up any of them. 1 pin will do, but a second doesn't hurt. Nobody, unless the pin hurts. And then now we're just going to do a top stitch, technically an edge stitch all the way around. And I'll show you how to sew on a turn. So bring your tag underneath. We're going to line it up right on the edge, control the presser foot, and I'm going to use my hand and just bring it down so I can see. The needle's going to drop very close to the edge, which I'm happy with. So I'm going to start by sewing. And again, if you're not using a straight stitch, you want to back stitch that. And we'll sew all the way along. And then when you get close to the edge, we're going to, this is a back stitch, because I know that's going to happen. With the needle in the down position, we're going to lift the presser foot up. Then we're going to pivot the fabric. And then put the presser foot back down and continue stitching. What's key about sewing on a turn is that you want to make sure that the needle's in the down position. That way you don't lose your previous stitch. If it's not in the down position, when you pivot the fabric, you'll move it everywhere, and then your next stitch is going to be a lot different than where your last one was. So again, the key is to have the needle in the down position before you turn the fabric, and then continue sewing. Now that we have the tag attached, let's talk about the waistband. So we'll grab our waistband panel. This should be cut using the rib knit material. And you can either cut it to the same length that we have on our pattern, or if you have a hoodie that you really like wearing, you like the way the waistband sits, how tight it is, then you can take your favorite hoodie, you can grab some measuring tape and measure that length, and instead just cut the rib knit according to that. But for now, we'll use what's on the chart. You're gonna grab your rib knit material so that we match up these short edges here. I'll just move this to the side, and we're gonna clip it in place. Once we have the edges clipped and lined up, we're gonna stitch at 3/8 of a seam allowance stitch all the way down using a straight stretch stitch. So we're gonna bring it to our iron, and again, just like the rib knit cuff, we're gonna open it up, split open the seam, and sometimes it helps to just do a little finger press to keep it open. Spread them out, and then we're gonna grab our iron. Just iron it down, iron it open, just like that. And same like before, we're gonna match seam to seam. We're gonna fold everything inside itself, and we're gonna clip it closed. Make sure to line up the edges so that they're even. Let it rest. So like before, we want to attach the rib knit to the fleece, just like the cuff. But this time, because the rib knit is so much bigger on this one versus a small cuff, we want to make sure that we get an even stitch throughout the whole waistband. So we're going to grab some chalk and actually divide this into 4 pieces, both the body and the waistband. So starting at the seam, I'm going to find that seam and I'm just going to pinch it and let the fabric kind of flush itself out. Give it a light tap. And right here should be the other half. So I'm going to draw some chalk here. Just like that. And then I want to match up that chalk line, that half, to the other half, which is where the seam allowance is. And if I match those up, then the left and right side should show me where the other quadrants are, the other quarters. And with my chalk, I'll mark those. So here's one, and here's the other. Just remove this. And so now what you get are, the waistband is now split into 4 equal pieces. You have from the seam allowance to this chalk, 1, from this chalk to this one, 2, 3, 4. And I'm going to do the same thing for this bottom hem, using this as the middle line, this crease. I know this is the middle for the front, and I know this fold here is the middle for the back as well. So if I can line those up, I can clip it in place just to be sure of it, like this. I'll do the same thing, just kind of pull the sides, massage it out, and now I know that here is 1/4, and then on this side, just flush it out. Here's my other quarter. And now we're going to put the waistband on the body. The folded edge is going to the top of the hoodie, and just go around the waistband. And now I want to match up this chalk with this. So I know the middle of the body's here, and I know the middle of the waistband's here. So I match that up. Same with the back. I know that this is the middle, so I'm going to match that with the middle here. And this, chalk to chalk. Now what this is going to show me is that the rib knit, the waistband, is actually smaller than the body. So we have to stretch out the rib knit to match the body. And that's going to create that cinch look. But we want to make sure we get an even sew all the way around. So by dividing the waistband and the body into 4, I can link them up with clips equally so that they're going to be spread apart, and we're going to get an even stretch stitch all the way around. All right, so let's bring it to our sewing machine. So I'm going to take off the free arm, and I'm going to put my sweater underneath. usually like to start at the seam for most of my projects. We're going to sew it at 3/8 of an inch stitch, and then we're going to follow it with a zigzag stitch or a serge stitch to end it. And I'll start here. And when you're sewing with stretch, you want to pull it so that it's smooth. See how there's a lot of slack under here? When the rib knit's taut, there's a lot of slack on the fleece. So I'm going to pull it enough so that they're both flush with each other. I'm going to have one hand on the receiving side at the end there. And you're going to sew it, and your arms are just going to move with the sewing machine, but you're going to let the sewing machine feed the fabric. You're not pushing, you're not pulling, you're letting the machine pull it, and your hands are just going to follow along. So like this, everything's lined up, this whole edge is lined up. I'm going to start sewing. Do a back stitch if you're doing a straight stitch. I'm just going to go along. And if you find the distance from here to here too long and you're not able to match up this fabric, then feel free to add some extra clips. Just make sure that the fabric's flush when you do it. So, for example, now is a good time to clip, so I'll just pinch right here and add a clip. And now instead of holding back here, I can hold up here and get a lot tighter of a grip to where I'm sewing. So sometimes position your hand a bit lower so that the fabric rolls over the edge of this free arm. Just helps keep the two fabrics in place together. So if it's up here, you know it's a little bit loose, it could kind of move around. If it's down here, you kind of have a little bit of pressure to hold that against the edge. Here's the same thing. I just finished my first quadrant. My second one, the distance from the sewing machine all the way to my hand, it's so far to try to keep these two pieces aligned. It's going to be a bit difficult, so I want to make sure they're aligned, flush, and then I'm just going to add some clips while the machine's holding it in. Again, my sewing machine, the presser foot is down and the needle's in a down position, so that's holding my previous stitch. And you want to make sure the fabric's flush. If it's not flush like this, it's going to be distorted. See how this is flat and this has a gap? So you want to make sure you pull it a bit so that they're flat together. Don't overstretch it. Just pull it enough that they meet, and then use a clip to hold it in place. And now I don't have to hold back here, I can hold up here, finish this one, and then I can hold here. We have a waistband attached to our body, we have a straight stitch, we have a zigzag stitch or a serge stitch to hold it up, finish off the edges, and now we're just going to iron it so that the seam allowance is pointing up towards the body. So I'm going to do it from the inside. Once I go all the way around, I'll do it from the outside as well. Essentially we're going to do another top stitch again to hold the seam allowance up. It's just going to give us a different look. These top stitches for the bottom, we did it for the side body as well. You don't have to do them, but I like to showcase this step in case you choose to.
So not everybody does it?
No, I feel like most sweaters actually won't have this extra top stitch, but I mean it adds an extra step for whoever's making the hoodie, but I think just, you know, showcasing that option kind of makes it a little bit nicer, puts a little bit extra detail into the hoodie. And then I like to start at my seams right here. Sometimes as you get to the more bulky parts where you have like a lot of folds, it helps to just assist the feed dogs in pulling it through, because it might just bunch up a lot because of the presser foot. Don't pull it too hard, like let the machine do the pulling, but you can feel when it's not moving and you need to give it a little bit of extra push. Like that. And then again, as you're sewing, don't pull hard. See how you can see the stitches in there? But, you know, if it's not ironed down properly, you might get like a lot of bunching like that. So just help smoothen out the fabric. So we're gonna grab our last panel here, the hood, and we're gonna take off the pattern. And ideally, if you could just squeeze it out without losing your clips, that would be clutch, because we already have the right sides together. and we want to make sure the panels are lined up properly. If you can't do this, that's fine. Take the pattern out and then just take off all the clips and realign them. Make sure all the corners are matched up again. Everything looks good. And if you're done, then we're going to do a straight stretch stitch all the way along this curved edge at 3/8 of an inch seam allowance. So 3/8 of an inch seam allowance all the way around here. Once we have that straight stitch, we're going to cover up the raw edge with our serger or overlocker machines, or if you don't have those, we're going to do our zigzag stitches and just do that along this curved edge as well. When you're sewing a curve, take your time. You want to like gently pivot it as the sewing machine's moving. But if you need to take it slow, a few stitches, make sure the sewing needle is down, and then turn your fabric like that. Turn, slightly adjust as it's going. Or once you get enough experience, you just kind of pull as it's going. We have right sides together, yeah, and we got a straight stitch going around, followed by that zigzag or serger stitch around to finish off the raw edges. So we're in a good spot. So the next step is we're gonna serge or zigzag stitch this last edge. So kind of imagine it like this. Here's the hood. This front edge is gonna be the front of the hood. This is the part that wraps around your head. And then this edge, this curved edge, is gonna be what connects to the body. So what's going to happen is we need to undo the clips here and just finish off the raw edges here before we pull them back and sew it down. So we're going to grab our sewing machine, go to our zigzag settings. Ideally we have a serger, but we can make do with the zigzag stitch. And we're going to do a zigzag stitch all the way around one swift stitch. We have the zigzag stitch or the serge edge done, and it just goes all the way around the front. So next we're actually going to fold it by 1 inch, and we're going to fold it to the wrong side. Basically this will give us a nice clean fold for what's going to be facing on the outside, and then the inside will be locked down like this. So we're going to take this to our iron and we're going to iron it down at that 1 inch fold. Keep it down, give it a press. Lift, press, and as I press, I just want to hold this in because knit does not hold as much as I want it to. So I'm going to use clips to hold it in. We're just going to do 1 inch all the way around like this. There you go. Okay, so our hood is clipped in at 1 inch on the sides now. So we're gonna put right sides on the outside, flip it inside out, just kind of massage out those seams so it's nice and open. And we're gonna do a straight stretch stitch to hold in that fold. So I know we folded it 1 inch. What we're gonna do is do a 7/8 of an inch seam allowance stitch all the way up, around, and across. One stitch, gonna take us all the way around, and because it's 7/8 of an inch, it'll hold in that 1 inch fold on the back side. So let's bring it to our sewing machine and start. Line it up to 7/8 of an inch stitch. Make sure you're not on your zigzag settings. Bring it back to the straight stitch, and we're gonna go all the way around. Oh, I can actually leave the... So we're gonna grab our hood, and we want to find the middle point, and we know that the middle point for the hood is going to be at the seam allowance, and luckily we have the fold lines, but I'll mark it just in case. Right here is the front, here's the back, and we're going to start, so we want right sides together, so right side, we want to start at the back here. So I have the seam match it up with the middle of the hoodie, like that. Now we're going to clip it all the way around, starting from the middle, working towards the right side, and then starting from the middle, working to the left, until we have it all clipped together. So now we have the hood attached to the body. We have it hooked up with a straight stitch and then a zigzag stitch or a serge to finish the raw edges. If you want, you could do one more stitch here and just sew the seam allowance down to the body. So push the seam allowance downwards and sew it. If you are going to top stitch this, I would start at somewhere more inconspicuous, not at the front middle, maybe at the back seam here, and then make sure that the seam allowance is pushed to the body, not to the hood, and then just hit it at that 1/4 inch stitch all the way around. Make sure you're in your straight stitch settings, not the zigzags. And here we go. I actually really like doing this extra top stitch because not a lot of black hoodies have this contrasting white stitching, and I feel like the more top stitching that I add to the hood, to the bottom, to the sides, just kind of reiterates that uniqueness to the sweater, only done by handmade. And when you're done sewing, make sure to clean up underneath that throw plate, because sewing with fleece collects so much extra debris underneath that you want to take care of your machines just the same way you take care of your other equipment. If you're looking for the pattern, the fabric, the supplies, or any of the tools that I'm using, there's a bunch of links down below. And until next time, peace.